Bookworms, Jess the Bookworm here. I feel like in these videos, either I look like halfway decent or I look like this. So apologies for that, but real life. Um, Today I want to talk about books written in verse. So written like with a poetic kind of use of language, right? Poetic devices, all those things. So I want to talk about some books that I really enjoyed that I read, or all of these actually I listened to that are written in verse. So I did listen to all of these in audiobooks, and I really enjoyed listening to them in that medium because I just feel like it gives me a better sense of what's happening in the story. I can hear the way that the author intended the pacing and the tone and just the changing of their voice. It's just, I thought listening to them was just amazing. I love books written in verse. They are usually quick. They get deep into meaning and into important messages with smaller amounts of text, right? You can read a page or listen to just a short part and get into some really deep ideas using the poetic devices that they do. Also, from the standpoint of an educator, I think that books written in verse can be great for reluctant readers because, often they're shorter. And when you look at a page, there's going to be less words on it. And sometimes they're even spaced in kind of unique patterns to kind of catch your attention, catch your eye. And from like an analytical perspective in the classroom, it would be amazing to look at several pages of a text that's written in verse and kind of analyzing why the author makes certain choices that they do. Why are they choosing to use, this poetic device? Or why are they using this figurative language? And it's something that you would be able to read a novel written in verse in a lot less time than you would a traditional novel. So I just think there's a lot of benefits, and I just personally enjoy them. I've read a lot in the past few years that have just like crushed me, some of them, because they're so emotional and so just like heavy, and it all happens within a very, very short text. So I want to go over just a few of these that I really enjoyed, and please let me know in the comments below any novels that you've read in verse that you really enjoyed. So the first book written in verse that I want to talk about is Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. And this is all about a boy named Jack, and he does not want to write poetry. And his teacher is making him write poetry, even though, according to Jack, poetry is only for girls. And he can't write poetry. He can't do it. His teacher just keeps consistently you have to write poetry. I want you to write something. Just try it. And we get to see Jack's progression of just thinking that poetry is just this unattainable thing he can't write. He doesn't want to write it, to then seeing him grow as a writer, as a poet. And we just learn a lot of things about his life through the way that he writes and through the things that he writes. There is some very sad and touching moments. It will definitely leave you feeling quite emotional, I think. And it's just a short, quick read. And I think it's something would be wonderful to share with kids who just think that poetry is this very difficult thing that you try to read and that you have to try and find the meaning of, and they don't know the meaning of it. This is written in a simple way that students would be able to get the language and understand what Jack's talking about, and probably be able to empathize with him feeling like poetry is just not something that he can do. So I loved it. Apparently there is a second novel. I'm not sure if it's a sequel or not, but it's called Hate That Cat, which I don't care for that title because I love cats, especially my cat, Marley. But I haven't read that one yet, so I can't really talk about it. But that is one that I might consider picking up because I did really enjoy um, Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. So that's the first one I wanted to talk about. The next novel I want to talk about is Swing by Kwame Alexander. This was beautiful and raw, and it crushed me. It crushed me. But this was an absolutely amazing one. We have Noah, one of the main characters. He's absolutely in love with his best friend. He doesn't know how to tell her. His best friend is Walt, but his nickname is Swing. And Swing is trying to help Noah to win her over. I think they find some old like love letters or love poems, and it kind of inspires Noah to start writing these anonymous love letters to his best friend. And so it's very upbeat, lighthearted at the beginning, and then at the end we definitely get a huge tone shift, and a lot of very intense things happen that changes Noah and his friends' lives forever. This definitely has some trigger warnings, so if you want to pick this up, definitely look into that. But this was just a very raw and difficult at times to read novel in verse. So I do highly recommend it. It was amazing, but just be prepared to be crushed. Okay. So the next one I want to talk about is one that is like an absolute favorite of mine. I remember listening to this probably a year or two ago and just thinking about it frequently, still even to this day, thinking about some of the lines and just some of the ideas that were brought up in this book. And it was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. And this was, I found out, I couldn't believe this was her debut novel. And it was amazing, like amazing. And it's all about this girl named Ziamara. And she writes poetry, and we see a lot of her poetry that she writes and kind of keeps to herself. We learn a lot about her and her kind of growing up and growing into herself and facing just these differences between herself and her mother. Her mother is very religious, and Ziamara just is trying to figure out how she feels about different things and often conflicts with her mother. And then Ziamara really enjoys poetry. There's a slam poetry club after school that she knows her mother does not want her to go to, will not want her to go to, but she really wants to go. And so she's kind of having to make some decisions. I thought this was just an amazingly beautifully written novel. It was awesome. And I think any student or person, frankly, they don't have to be a student or a young person, anyone who's kind of like trying to understand themselves, their place in the world, and just coming to grips with that they're going to be different often than the people who raised them. And so I just thought this was a beautiful look at like a mother-daughter relationship and those tense years during, you know, the times when a young person is becoming a teenager and becoming a young adult, and just all of the things that come along with that journey. So the next novel I want to talk about is Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga. This is about a girl named Jude who's from Syria, and she's Muslim, and she does immigrate to America. And so we experience some of the prejudice against Muslim people in this novel. So basically, Jude and her mother have to leave Syria because of some of the volatile and dangerous things happening there. So they immigrate to America without her father or her brother. Which creates a lot of anxiety in our main character, of course. And we get to experience that fear and that anxiety along with her through her perspective. We also get to experience life as an immigrant coming to America, which is a perspective that's different from my own. I've always lived in America. But we see a lot of things that she notices as being different from being at home. And she also, there was a powerful part about her saying that Americans love labels and they love labeling things because she had never considered herself Middle Eastern. She didn't have that as a label, but in America, she was always referred to as a Middle Eastern person. And so I just thought it was such a beautiful and a powerful book. We see her having to come to grips with leaving her home and her father and her brother, coming to a new place, and then not really feeling like she was at home, not feeling like she belonged or fit in. And there's just some very powerful things that happen in this story. I do like some of the friendships that she develops. And I thought this was such an amazing novel. This one I did give 5 stars, and it was just absolutely beautiful. So, highly recommend. The next novel that I want to talk about is titled For Black Girls Like Me. And it is, I would say, it's a middle grade, maybe a YA. This novel does have some trigger warnings, so look those up. This is by Mariama J. Lockington, and it was written in poems, very lyrical style, but it also had some letters that were exchanged back and forth. So we have Makita is our protagonist. She's 11 years old, and she is Black, and she was adopted at a young age from a white family, and she has a white sister. And she, one of the lines that I thought was really good, she said, "I'm a girl, but most days I feel like a question mark." And she just kind of is trying to come to terms with feeling different from her family, but loving her family. And it definitely dives into a look at some of the microaggressions, some racism, some mental illness, and then just her not feeling like she fully fits in. Now, one of the big things that happens at the beginning of the book for this character is that she moves away from her best friend, who's also Black and adopted. And so she had a very close connection with her. And we experience a lot of the novel through letters written to her friend back, where she used to live. I just thought this was such a powerful novel and powerful look into all of the questions that we have about growing up, and the questions that she has about who she is, and wanting to know where she came from, but also kind of dealing with the family that raised her, and just kind of trying to find her way and trying to feel like she fits in. It was absolutely beautiful. I loved it. So the next one that I want to talk about is Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. And this is actually a memoir that goes into Jacqueline Woodson's life and her childhood. And it discusses and shows us what it was like to grow up as a Black person in the 60s and 70s in New York City and South Carolina. And she goes into discussing how, as a child, she was experiencing and noticing and observing the civil rights movement and all that came with that. And it was just very elegant. The images that she creates through the verse was just beautiful. And she discusses and talks about her journey of finding her own voice in writing, and her journey of education. And she struggled with reading as a child. And so I just think a lot of the things that are discussed in there, students and young people and even adults can look at that and take something away from it, and just see the beautiful writing and the experience that she went through that have helped to make her the amazing writer that she is. Those are all the books that I wanted to talk about. Please, please, please let me know in the comments your favorite book that has been written in verse. I absolutely would love to do a part 2 of this video once I read some more of your recommendations. I hope you guys have a wonderful night, evening, day, morning, whenever you're watching this. I'll see you next time. Bye.